Don't worry, I've already decided about Dad's inheritance. I'm taking the money, and you can have that abandoned house. After our father passed away, my brother Paul arbitrarily distributed the inheritance. Moreover, my sister-in-law also taunted me with a full-faced grin. You should be thankful even for a haunted house. That house looks like it could collapse at any moment. If you don't demolish it soon, we'll get complaints from the neighbors. I felt anger rising within me as she referred to our family home as a haunted house. Reluctantly, I was cleaning the wildly neglected house. When I opened a safe in my father's room and found something unexpected inside. My name is Ashley, a 36-year-old office worker living with my husband and son. Balancing work and raising my 5-year-old son is tough. But with my husband helping with housework and childcare, I've managed to persevere. Until 3 years ago. My mother was healthy and would sometimes help by picking up my son from daycare. My mother, who lived with my father in our nearby family home, had been taking care of my son until she suddenly passed away unexpectedly. My father had been unwell and receiving medical treatment. So I had never imagined my mother would pass away first. I'm sorry for making you suffer through taking care of me. Before the funeral, he said that through tears. Hearing my father's words, I also reflected on having relied on my mother to take care of my son. And my husband comforted me. It's not your fault or your father's. Your mother seemed happy taking care of everyone. She must have been satisfied. Even with what my husband said, I couldn't accept it immediately. The sudden loss of my mother was a great shock to both my father and me. And we were unable to think of anything else, so my husband took care of the funeral arrangements. My brother Paul, however, acted as if it was someone else's problem even after our mother's death. I'm not going to be the chief mourner. I've never done a funeral before, so Ashley, you guys handle it. As the eldest son, my brother should have been preparing for the funeral. But he said this with a look of annoyance. I had hoped that he would step up for our mother's funeral, but that hope was in vain. Thanks to my husband, the funeral went smoothly, but by then, Paul had disappeared. Paul is such a disappointment. She can't rest peacefully in heaven. When my father said that with a sigh, I agreed with him. The funeral was over. And I was contemplating discussing our father's future living arrangements with Paul. Worried about leaving my father alone due to his poor health, I considered having him live with us. Just as I was about to contact Paul, he and his wife showed up at the family home. Let's talk about Mom's inheritance. As the eldest son, I can decide, right? As he started to say arbitrary things, my sister-in-law continued with a smirk. I'll take this house, but I won't take care of your father. I was furious that my sister-in-law, who hadn't even shown up for the funeral, was interfering in the inheritance. You didn't even attend the funeral. You must have been very busy, huh? Even as I spoke sarcastically, she pretended not to hear. The atmosphere turned tense as Paul and his wife appeared. And my father, with a look of dismay, said, "This house is in my name, so it's not part of the inheritance. Your mom's assets are just some savings, so let's distribute them as planned." I hadn't cared much about my mother's assets, but as he said, there were only a few savings. My brother and his wife, unable to believe his words, searched around the family home. What's inside this safe? There might be gold bars. Pointing at the old safe in my father's room, my brother yelled. The safe had been there since I was little, and I had never seen inside it. There's no key for that safe, so it can't be opened. Besides, who would put valuables in such a small safe? As he said, since the safe isn't that big, there's a risk that a thief could steal it along with everything inside. Despite Paul's quick resignation, my sister-in-law seemed curious about what was inside. If there's no key, why don't we just call a locksmith to open it? Even though it's small, it might contain something like a passbook. Hearing this, Paul seemed hesitant, but my father retorted in exasperation. You can hire a locksmith if you want, but you'll have to pay the fee yourselves. I believe it only contains some documents. Hearing that, it seemed like too much trouble for Paul and his wife. Just then, I remembered that my mother had given me a key when I was young. I wasn't sure if that was for this safe, but she had mentioned keeping that with me. Paul had never seen the safe opened and assumed it unlikely to contain valuables. He figured that since my mother's passbooks and insurance documents were stored elsewhere, there wouldn't be anything else of importance. It's a waste of money to pay a high fee for worthless documents. Get rid of that confusing safe. As Paul spoke in frustration, his wife agreed. We divided my mother's estate according to the law. But Paul and his wife seemed dissatisfied with the small amount. My sister-in-law, not even an heir, kept complaining until the end. Once the inheritance discussion was over, Paul appeared indifferent about my father's future. So I told him I would take our father home. You take care of Dad. Just don't monopolize his assets. I was surprised by my brother's focus only on the assets, and then my sister-in-law chimed in. Exactly. Your father was a company executive, so he must have substantial assets. I was annoyed by her interference in the unrelated matter of my father's inheritance. True, my father had been a senior executive at a large company and probably had significant assets. Unlike my mother, but I didn't care about the inheritance. What worried me was my increasingly frail father, especially after my mother's sudden death. But it seemed like Paul and his wife only cared about the inheritance. I was relieved and happy that my husband agreed to have my father live with us. My father soon moved in with our family. And we decided against moving into the old family home because it was in poor condition. Empty father started to recover gradually, enjoying his time with his grandson. He continued his medical visits, and his health didn't deteriorate much, which reassured both my husband and me. With my father living with us, we stopped going to the family home, which became worryingly neglected. Should we consider selling the family home? The building is no longer usable, right? My husband agreed, so we discussed selling it with my father. He was also concerned about the deteriorating state of the home and contacted a real estate agent right away. However, Paul and his wife suddenly showed up at our house, causing a commotion. That family home will be mine in the future, so don't dispose of it without my consent. His wife shouted threateningly. Don't let Ashley trick you into selling it. My father and I were surprised by their complaints since we hadn't anticipated them. When my father suggested transferring the home to Paul as is, his wife objected even more. Who would want that abandoned house? It's just trouble. Plus, there'd be gift tax, so we'll wait until you pass. What we want is a clean, single-family home. Ashley, can you clean it? And also renovate it while you're at it. The building may be dilapidated, but the land can be effectively utilized. My sister-in-law had done her research and even discussed tax implications. It was possible to dispose of my father's land and building despite their objections. But we stopped the sale due to their persistent arguments, with the vacant property issue becoming a nuisance. My husband and I decided to at least maintain the yard to avoid troubling the neighbors. However, the building itself did turn into a ruin. Not realizing how quickly a house could deteriorate when uninhabited, my father and us were shocked. We had removed any valuables from the home, but the unopened safe in my father's room remained. Was there really nothing important in that safe? When I asked, my father also admitted he wasn't sure what was inside. Your mother had the key, but she never seemed to use it. Hearing this, I became convinced that the key my mother had given me was indeed for that safe. Since moving in with us, my father had been more energetic than before. But he had caught a cold a while back, perhaps due to letting his guard down. Initially, my father thought he would recover quickly. But he didn't improve and eventually had to be hospitalized. Thinking Paul would be concerned, I informed him, and he came to the hospital with his wife. Tell us about the inheritance while you're still conscious. Dad, you must have various assets besides the family home, right? As Paul abruptly started talking about the inheritance, I was about to object when his wife yelled at me. You and your family aren't secretly taking Dad's money, are you? Just because you live together doesn't mean you can cheat. Their focus on money rather than my father's health infuriated me. My father, still conscious, tried to calm them down, but they weren't really listening. Throughout their visits to the hospital, Paul and his wife kept checking how much wealth there was. So my father eventually gave up and disclosed details. Once they knew how much my father had, Paul and his wife were delighted and then stopped showing up. Angry at my brother's heartlessness, I overheard my father muttering, "When they're so happy about it, it becomes hard to tell the real story." When I questioned my father, he did not respond. After a while, my father's condition became critical. And when I contacted Paul, he said something appalling. Is Dad finally going to kick the bucket? I've got lots of preparations, so I'll leave the rest to you. His voice carried an unsettling cheerfulness. I was about to argue, but he abruptly ended the call. His attitude, seemingly waiting for our father to pass away, almost made me explode with anger. Regretting that I had informed Paul, I prayed for my father's recovery. But sadly, my prayers were not answered. I didn't want to talk to Paul, so I had my husband contact him instead. You can handle everything else. Dad said it's fine. I'm busy with the inheritance, so you guys take care of the funeral. Paul seemed cheerful when he talked to my husband. Normally calm, my husband was visibly upset and told me about it. I hadn't expected much from Paul and his wife since they hadn't been helpful during my mother's funeral. But it was hard to forgive their preoccupation with the inheritance. Thanks to my husband, we managed to carry out my father's funeral smoothly, and I was grateful. I expected Paul to start making noise about the inheritance. And sure enough, he showed up at our house. Don't worry, I've already decided about Dad's inheritance. I'm taking the money, and you can have that abandoned house. It's untouched, and we don't want that anyway. It seemed Paul had preemptively decided how to divide my father's estate. He probably didn't care about the land anymore. My sister-in-law, arriving with him, said with a full grin, "You should be thankful even for a haunted house. That house looks like it could collapse at any moment. You better demolish it quickly before we get complaints from the neighbors." I was annoyed by my sister-in-law's sarcasm, especially since she had opposed selling the house when my father suggested it, but now urging us to demolish it. It seemed like Paul and his wife were inheriting the cash and leaving me the burden of the dilapidated family home. Angry at their absence at the funeral and their arbitrary decision about the inheritance, I was trembling with anger. Seeing this, they left, looking pleased. Don't be too upset. An inheritance requires a formal division agreement, so it won't just happen the way your brother said. Comforted by my husband, I decided to clean up the family home with him. Regardless of who would inherit, it needed to be done. When we went there, the place was even more run down than we expected. Is that safe in your father's room still unopened? Curious about the contents, I had brought the key my mother had given me long ago. With a nervous heart, I inserted the key, and with a loud noise, the safe opened. It was this key after all. Opening the door, we found only documents inside, leaving both my husband and me slightly disappointed. Imagine if there had been gold bars in here. Your brother and his wife would start another uproar. While my husband chuckled and looked through the documents, his expression suddenly turned serious. Noticing his change, I also looked at the documents and couldn't help but exclaim. I had never heard such a thing from my parents. I wonder if Paul even knows about this. Although my husband was initially shaken, he quickly smiled. If your brother knew about this, he wouldn't have decided on the inheritance on his own. He'd be shocked to see these documents. While my husband seemed amused, I was too shocked to smile sincerely. When we brought the documents home, my brother and his wife soon arrived in a flustered state. When I tried to withdraw Dad's savings at the bank, they said I needed a division agreement and a family registry. Let's prepare the division agreement quickly. My husband struggled to hold back his laughter as he responded to my flustered brother. We will prepare the division agreement, but you're not involved, right? After all, you're not his biological child. Paul and his wife were dumbfounded when they heard this. So I showed them the family registry that was in the safe. So, you were Mom's stepchild? I just found out myself. But since you weren't legally adopted by Dad, you don't have inheritance rights. Even as I explained, my brother and his sister-in-law stared at the documents, unable to grasp the reality. Watching him carefully read through the documents, I realized the meaning behind our father's words before he passed. Father's phrase, "It becomes hard to tell the truth," referred to the fact that my brother was not his biological son and had no inheritance rights. Paul finally seemed to understand as he silently stood there. However, not willing to give up, his wife exclaimed she would obtain a new copy of the family registry and stormed out. The family registry we had was old, and although it might have been updated, given my father's words, it was unlikely Paul was legally adopted. Unfortunately, it seems you can't inherit his estate. I wish he had told you. As I spoke softly, my husband showed me a letter that he had found in the safe. It was addressed to me from my mother, left in case of an emergency. It appeared that my father had intended to legally adopt Paul as a son. But since my father was wealthy, she opposed it. She felt sorry for letting Paul inherit as he wasn't her biological son, stating that just being raised as a true son was enough. She had tried several times to tell this to Paul but never did, and ended up writing the truth in the letter. She wanted me to tell Paul after she passed away and had entrusted me with the key. When I showed Paul the letter from our mother, he seemed to accept everything. Make sure you tell me important things. I thought I was going to inherit a lot and went on a spending spree. Hearing my brother's confession, my husband and I panicked. Apparently, they had splurged on cars and luxury goods, thinking he would inherit all of my father's savings. You might want to hurry and return those purchases, right? You don't have the money to pay for them, do you? My husband, who had been smiling moments ago, turned pale upon realizing the amount they had spent. I admired my husband's genuine concern even though it was not his direct problem. Chastised by my husband, Paul quickly left, and soon after, his wife returned. Oh, it turns out Paul really isn't your father's child. I thought we were going to inherit, so I secretly went into debt. Hearing her confession, my husband and I were at a loss for words. The distressed sister-in-law begged me for money, and I responded with restrained anger. I can't give money to someone who didn't even attend the funeral. It would upset my deceased parents. Desperate for money, she became aggressive. I won't be able to pay my rent if this continues. Just lend me the money quietly. Losing patience with her demanding tone, I retorted sarcastically. If you can't pay the rent, I could rent you the house you called a haunted house for cheap. With nothing to say in return, she left with a look of frustration. Paul tried to sell what he had bought, but couldn't recover the full amount, and the debt remained. My sister-in-law was also reprimanded for her secret debts. The large amount panicked Paul. They tried to ask relatives for help, but no one was willing to assist two people who hadn't even attended their parents' funeral. As my sister-in-law had feared, they couldn't pay the rent and were evicted from their rental home, now hopping between hostels. Surprisingly, despite their strained relationship, they hadn't divorced. No matter how hard they tried, the debt never seemed to decrease due to interest. Meanwhile, using the inheritance, I renovated our derelict family home and we started living there. Initially, I had considered selling it, but memories of my parents made me want to keep it. Our new home was much larger than the previous one, and our son enjoyed running around happily. My husband was also pleased with the move to a homeowner from a renter. And we all felt the move was for the best. The money I inherited allowed us to renovate it like a new house. But I kept the safe with my mother's letter inside. Keeping the safe made it feel like my parents were still with us, lessening the loneliness.
I am Sandra. A few weeks ago, my father, who had been ill, passed away. I wish I could have shown him his grandchild's face. As I sighed, those words escaped my lips. I got married when I was 25. That was exactly 5 years ago. I had made this promise with my father who attended my wedding. I'll tell you first when I get pregnant. However, that promise was never fulfilled. That's about the only regret I have regarding my father. Since my father's illness was discovered a year ago, I have tried to do everything I could for him. I regularly returned to my parents' house and visited the hospital with my mother. We also made phone calls and even video calls. Basically, I did everything I could think of. Still, it doesn't mean I don't have things to think about. I wonder if I could have done more. As I muttered this, my mother next to me said,
"It's okay, Sandra, you did well."
"Really?"
"Yes, I'm sure your father was pleased too."
As we were having this conversation, my sister Tracy finally came home. "I'm home. I've brought the lawyer with me." Saying this, my sister entered the living room. Following her was a man in his mid-40s. I guessed this man must be the lawyer, and as I thought this, the man greeted.
"I have contacted you. I am Lawyer Brown." "Thank you for coming. Please come this way." "Then, if you'll excuse me."
Led by my mother, Lawyer Brown took a seat. Then almost immediately, my sister started saying, "I heard from this lawyer that there's quite a bit of inheritance from Dad." "You're not getting all of it, you know." "I know that." My sister glared at me angrily as she shouted. Naturally, I glared back. My sister and I have never been on good terms. It wasn't this bad in the past, but things turned sour quickly after my father's illness was discovered. A lot of it was due to my sister's arrogant attitude. Despite my many attempts to contact her, she never came to visit our father. Maybe my approach was too harsh at times. I was worried about our father and might have spoken too strongly, but my sister's response was just as stubborn. "We're not children, there's no need to be so stubborn." To which my sister retorted, "Huh? I'm not being stubborn. It's just not easy to come from the city." "This place is in the countryside, yes, but it's just an hour by train, right?" "That 1 hour is tough. It costs money, too." "Is money that important to you?" "It obviously is. I'm busy, so stop contacting me," she snapped at the end. No matter how far away she lived, she could have shown her face occasionally. That's what I always thought, and that's how our relationship quickly deteriorated. In the end, my sister never came to visit our father, so our relationship is still strained today. Sensing the tense atmosphere, the lawyer intervened.
"Please, calm down."
"Yes, I'm sorry." As I apologized, the lawyer nodded and continued.
"As I mentioned over the phone, I am in possession of your husband's will." "When did he?"
As my mother murmured, the lawyer said,
"It was a few weeks before he passed away. He requested it over the phone." "So you went to the hospital?" "Yes. Under the supervision of his primary physician, he wrote the will right in front of me."
It seems that my father had arranged for the doctor to contact the lawyer after he passed away. After my father's death, the primary physician contacted the lawyer. Following this, the lawyer contacted our family.
"And that's why I contacted you."
As he said this, the lawyer took out a white envelope. He placed it in front of us and said, "Here's the will." "That's definitely Dad's handwriting," I murmured as I confirmed the word will on the envelope. Meanwhile, my sister seemed impatient. Never mind that. Hurry up and tell us what it says. I'm busy.
Let's proceed then.
The lawyer smiled wryly as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. It read, Father's estate included the house, land, some savings, and a storage shed. We knew about the house and land, but what was this shed? As I pondered, my sister asked the lawyer, Hey, what about the farm?
The farm?
Yes, the farm Dad used to tend to as a hobby. During his life, my father ran a company in the next town. However, after turning 50, he began feeling the toll on his body.
I'm thinking of closing the company. I want to take it easy. Is that okay?
I heard this when I was in high school. My sister, who was in college at the time, objected, but my mother and I, thinking of Dad's health, agreed.
Tracy, don't worry about money. I have enough saved up.
Upon hearing this, my sister reluctantly agreed. Afterward, Dad really did close his company and started growing vegetables in a field near our house.
It feels good to move around growing vegetables.
Seeing Dad happy about it, I truly felt good about agreeing, but it seems my sister didn't feel the same. She said she would return home after graduating from college, but instead she got a job near her university. Eventually, she spontaneously married the CEO of an IT company she met at work. Setting that aside, Dad continued to work in his garden until he fell ill. Now my sister was claiming that the farm was part of the inheritance. The lawyer reviewed the documents after hearing my sister's claim. Soon he found a note and said,
The farm was rented.
Rented? I thought it was a large piece of land. My sister was visibly disappointed. Indeed, the farm where Dad grew vegetables was expansive, but it would be too much for us who knew nothing about farming. Maybe it was better that it was just rented. That's what I thought. As we discussed, the conversation shifted to the division of the inheritance.
As for the division of the estate, the house and land are to go to your mother.
My sister smirked at this. So we can split the rest as we like?
Please divide the savings and the storage shed fairly between you.
You mean cash by savings, right? I want the cash. How much is there?
The savings amount to about $100,000. With this amount, there's no need for inheritance tax.
Then I'll take the $100,000 in cash, my sister declared triumphantly, but there was no way I could agree with such a selfish proposal. I objected firmly. Wait a minute, I'm against that. Why? I'm the eldest. That has nothing to do with this. You can have the shed, that's fine. Wait, what's in the shed anyway? My sister turned to the lawyer who was flipping through the documents.
It's the shed next to the farm. You inherit the building, the land it sits on, and everything inside.
It comes with land? Her eyes lit up. Married to the CEO of an IT company, yet still hungry for more money? As I stood dumbfounded, the lawyer informed her.
It does come with land, but it's only about the size of 75 square feet.
What? 75 square feet?
Yes, here's a photo.
The lawyer placed photos of the shed on the table, showing both the interior and exterior. The exterior was just a shabby shack, clearly worn out. Inside there were only items like hose and garden scissors, nothing that seemed valuable. I don't want that. My sister's face twisted in displeasure. I peeked at the photos too, and it was all very ordinary stuff. I thought, they're just sentimental items, but they won't bring any money. As I was thinking, my sister said to me, Fine, I'll take the cash. You take that dirty shed. Wait a minute, that's not fair. You were the one who supported vegetable gardening. What are you complaining about now? It was hard to argue back. Yet if I didn't say anything, all of Dad's estate would end up with my sister. So we're agreed then. My sister pressed for confirmation. As I struggled to respond, my mother interjected.
If Tracy won't complain later, I won't object.
Why would I complain?
Then it's settled. Tracy takes the cash and Sandra gets the shed.
Okay, that's decided then. My sister smirked. Sensing something was off, I immediately objected. Wait, I haven't agreed to this. Huh? Just give it up. But, do you really want money that badly? You're so greedy. It's not like that, but... You really are tedious. Isn't Dad more important to you than money? That left me speechless. Of course, family is more important than money, but certainly money is important too. It shouldn't be compared with family. As I was lost in thought, my sister quickly concluded the discussion. In the end, the division was decided. My mother received the house and land, and my sister received Dad's savings. All that was left for me was the dirty shed. Afterwards, my sister signed a document stating she would not complain about the inheritance division and left with a loud laugh. I, on the other hand, was full of dissatisfaction. I, voicing her frustrations to my mother, asked, "Mom, why didn't you help me?"
"Oh, I did help you."
"How? You just sided with Tracy."
"That's not true. I made sure you got the shed."
"Huh? I'm not happy about getting that old shed." Mother, smiling, suggested,
"You might find it surprisingly nice if you go there."
I could only puff out my cheeks in response. The next day, I took the key I got from the lawyer and headed to the shed near the farm. It was just a few minutes' walk from the house, a rural road with no one else around. Eventually, I reached the farm that my father had rented. He had been hospitalized all year, so the farm was barren. I glanced at the empty farm as I unlocked the shed. Wow, the dust. The shed was quite dusty because it hadn't been cleaned. Still, I thought there might be some of my father's keepsakes inside, and began searching the shed. Nothing special here. It was just a dirty old shed. All I found were the tools my father used for gardening. They could be considered keepsakes, but they weren't anything significant. Maybe I should just take these things home for now. As I murmured this, I looked around the shed and noticed something. Huh? It seemed smaller inside than it looked from inside. Maybe it was just the dim light, but the shed felt a bit cramped. Is it just my imagination? Thinking this, I stepped outside, but the feeling of discrepancy persisted. After some thought, I decided to check around the back of the shed. The back was bordered by a forest of dense trees. Looking there, I was surprised to see a door on the back side as well. Huh? A back entrance too. Saying this, I had a sudden realization. From inside the shed, I saw only a wall. That meant there was only one entrance, but from the back side, there was clearly another door. What does this mean? I pondered. Normally, you should be able to see this door from inside as well. However, it wasn't visible from inside the shed. If that was the case, it meant there was a wall in between. In other words, there was a space that could only be entered from the back. The moment I realized this, I got excited. I thought, this must be a surprise set up by Dad. My father always loved surprises. He used to surprise me on my birthdays as well. Flooded with such memories, I found myself in tears. I quickly went back inside the shed and began searching for the back door key. If it were my father, he surely would have hidden it somewhere in the shed. With something akin to certainty, I rummaged through the shed. After a while, I discovered 2 keys hidden in the handle of a shovel. Going back to the back side, I inserted one of them into the door. With a click, the door opened. I thought, I wonder what's inside. Inside was indeed a very narrow space. It was only a few dozen inches wide. There stood a large safe, all alone. This one? Of Dad's company? I recognized the safe. It was the one that had been in the corner of the president's office when I visited my father's company as a child. How nostalgic. I rushed to the safe, a tangible memory of my father. My heart swelled with emotion. This alone was worth a significant part of the inheritance, but knowing my father, this wouldn't be the end. There must be more surprises. As I murmured, I inserted the other key into the safe. With a slightly rusty sound, the safe opened. What? No way! The moment I saw the contents, I gasped. Inside was an unexpected inheritance. What should I do? Oh, right. I need to tell Mom. I locked the safe and hurried to where my mother was. After explaining the situation to her, I called my husband. With his help, we transported the safe to my parents' house. That's when I realized the contents of the safe were undoubtedly my father's. However, including the shed in my inheritance might mean I'd have to pay inheritance tax. I better get this checked out properly. The contents of the safe were clearly valuable at first glance. After some thought, I decided to consult Lawyer Brown.
Inheritance tax, you say? In that case,
according to the lawyer, it would be better to consult a tax accountant for inheritance tax. He arranged for me to meet a tax accountant he knew. I left the complicated matters to the tax accountant. As time passed, about half a year went by. Just as I thought things were settling down, my sister came to my house, which was near our parents' home. What brings you here all of a sudden?
Yeah. I had some business at our parents' house.
Did you stop by on your way?
Something like that.
My sister's behavior was odd. It didn't add up. Even though we lived close to our parents' house, it took a good 10 minutes by car to reach the house I shared with my husband. Our relationship has soured over our father's situation. Just stopping by isn't something we would normally do. I couldn't shake off my suspicion as I watched her. Despite her nervous behavior, Tracy asked,
"Can I come in?"
Sure, but do you need something?
I need to talk.
She forced a smile and said that. Reluctantly, I let her into my house. After I served some coffee, she started fidgeting and blurted out,
I have to ask directly. Did you win the lottery or something?
Huh? No, I haven't.
Then did your husband get a bonus?
I tilted my head. I don't buy lottery tickets because I'm not interested in them. Moreover, while my husband does receive bonuses in the summer and winter, it's rare to get one at this time of year. What was she talking about? Confused, I decided to ask her directly. What are you talking about? Suddenly, Tracy burst out angrily.
Huh? Are you making fun of me?
What? What do you mean?
Money, Sandra, money. You have it, don't you?
Money? What about it?
Yes, I heard about it.
My sister began to speak excitedly, recounting a story from a few days earlier. Living in the city, Tracy had randomly encountered a female relative from our mother's side while downtown. This relative, upon seeing Tracy, started this conversation.
It must have been hard with your father.
Yes, well...
I visited him several times to pay my respects.
Is that so? Thank you.
But really, was it right to receive such a gift?
A gift?
Yes, didn't your sister send gift vouchers? Worth several $100s?
Gift vouchers? This was how the conversation went. Understandably, what caught my sister's attention were the gift vouchers. Hearing that I had sent them, Tracy assumed I had come into some unexpected money.
You must have come into some money. Tell me.
My sister pressed me, and I sighed in resignation. Then, sensing my attitude, Tracy snapped.
What's with that attitude? Are you mocking me?
No, it was just a sigh.
So, where did the money come from? That's what I want to know.
Where? From the inheritance, remember?
Inheritance?
Yes, after we've received the inheritance, I sent the vouchers to the relatives who had helped us. I explained this, and Tracy frowned.
But all you got was that dirty shed.
That's right.
And there's no way that shed could sell for any real money.
But there was a safe inside. That's where the real inheritance was.
What? A safe? Real inheritance?
Since Tracy looked baffled, I patiently explained. Inside the shed's safe were watches. They were all expensive pieces, collected by my father as a hobby during his lifetime. However, I wasn't sure of their exact value. On the other hand, the remaining cash from the estate was about $100,000. Considering he had been an early retiree as a business owner, this amount seemed modest. This indicated he might have invested a significant amount in those watches.
If they're high value, you'll have to pay inheritance tax.
After seeing what was in the safe, that's what my mother said. What should I do, Mom? After thinking it over, she advised.
These things always come out. You should file it properly.
How?
Well, let's ask that lawyer we talked to last time.
Thus, I consulted Lawyer Brown. He informed me that the inheritance tax would be based on the current value of the valuable items. He also recommended that I consult a tax accountant, whom he could refer. I left everything in the hands of this accountant. Eventually, it was discovered that the watches alone were worth several hundreds of thousands of dollars.
With watches this valuable, you'll need to pay inheritance tax.
How can I afford that? He suggested.
Why not keep the pieces you're emotionally attached to and sell the rest?
Indeed, as someone who didn't understand their full value, there was no point in me keeping such expensive watches. I preferred them to be with someone who appreciated their worth. With that thought, I ended up selling several of the watches. With the money from selling the watches, I paid the inheritance tax and used the remainder to the relatives who had helped us. Those took the form of gift vouchers. Among the items I kept was the pocket watch my father often wore. I shared this story with my sister while showing her the watch. It's not expensive, but it holds the most memories for me. However, upon hearing my story, my sister frowned and asked,
What? There's nothing left?
No, there are a few left in the safe.
Where's the safe?
It's at Mom's place. It was too heavy to move here from the company. My sister's expression turned contemplative, and I sensed a flicker of unease. But then she abruptly stood up and said,
I'm leaving, now that I know where the money came from,
and left. Given my sister's greedy nature, I thought she might demand some of the money from the sale of the watches. Well, at least she left without making a scene. I was relieved. However, I should have remembered that my sister isn't usually so understanding. That slipped my mind until later that night when I got a call from my mother.
It's urgent, Sandra. Please come over right away.
What's wrong, Mom?
Just hurry, it's serious.
Panicked, I rushed over with my husband. As we neared the house, I noticed something unusual. The area around the house was illuminated in red. What's going on? It became clear as we got closer. Several police cars were stationed around the house. I made my way through the crowd of onlookers to speak with my mother. What happened, Mom?
Oh, Sandra, you see...
She explained that around 9 p.m., feeling tired, she had gone to bed early. Soon after, she was disturbed by strange noises, the sound of someone rummaging through things, thumping and bumping around. Mother thought,
It must be a burglar.
She thought it was a burglar. Being alone, she felt powerless and decided to flee through a window. As she looked back, she could see the beam of a flashlight moving inside the house. Convinced it was a burglar, she ran to the neighbor's house and exclaimed,
Help! There's a burglar!
The neighbor, hearing this, immediately came out. They noticed a flickering light where my mother pointed. Naturally, the neighbor thought it was a burglar too and called the police. But it turned out not to be a burglar at all. It was just my sister sneaking around inside the house. Hearing my earlier story, my sister has secretly gone to search the safe. Of course, neither my mother nor the neighbor knew this. Soon, the police arrived due to the supposed emergency. However, the arrival of the police startled my sister. Thinking,
I need to get out of here.
She panicked. In her haste to escape, she bumped into the open safe door. Unfortunately, the safe, destabilized by the impact, tipped over toward my sister as she tried to flee, trapping her beneath it. So did my sister end up pinned under it?
That's right.
Really? Is she okay?
She was taken to the hospital by ambulance, but she keeps saying her leg hurts.
What was she thinking? I was truly exasperated. Later, both my mother and I explained it to the police officers who arrived to help. Moreover, since my sister was injured, I reluctantly called her husband late at night, to which he exclaimed,
What? She sneaked into her childhood home?
Yes, that's what happened.
What is she doing? She doesn't even do any housework.
I'm really sorry about my sister.
Never mind, I'm going to divorce her now.
Divorce?
Actually...
According to her husband, my sister had accumulated a considerable amount of debt. It seems she had been spending lavishly on luxury items. This came to light during a severe argument they just had. The last thing my sister said before storming out was,
I'll borrow from Mom and pay it back.
Apparently, the $100,000 my sister received as inheritance had also been poured into paying off her debts. Still not enough, she came to me, hoping to demand more money, only to find out about the contents of the safe. It's no wonder her husband was furious. Eventually, with a fractured leg, my sister remained in the hospital where her husband approached her to initiate divorce proceedings. Naturally, she made a big fuss.
I won't get divorced. Absolutely not.
But it was too late. Her husband had an application of the divorce papers. Presented with the papers, she had no choice. Now my sister lies bewildered in her hospital bed. Next to her, there's a magazine with part-time job ads, likely planning to start working to pay off her debts. For me, that's preferable. As for me, after the commotion, I decided to move back home. Of course, I'm worried about my mother, but there's another reason. I'm pregnant. After discussing with my husband, we planned for me to have a hometown childbirth at my parents' house. Though I wished my father was alive to hear the news of my pregnancy, I'm sure he would be delighted. So now I'm looking forward to giving birth to a healthy baby.
After 5 years of marriage, I was still childless. One day, my angry mother-in-law pushed me hard and spoke loudly, "You are not a real woman. You cannot give birth." She called me a she-male and ordered me to leave the room immediately and sleep on the balcony. I was stunned by her reaction, but sadly, my husband still stood with his mother and supported her. I left the room immediately and planned to take action, but after 1 month. My name is Emma, and I want to share my story. It's a story of love, conflict, and ultimately, the struggle for independence. 5 years ago, I thought I had everything figured out. I was a 32-year-old marketing executive, dedicated to my career and passionate about my work. I married David, who was 36, and we both shared dreams of building a life together. But life took a turn that I never expected. David and I met at a corporate event. He was charming, ambitious, and we quickly fell in love. Our wedding felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. We were eager to start a family, but we also wanted to enjoy our freedom for a while. So, we decided to wait a couple of years before having children. Looking back, that decision seems innocent enough, but little did I know it would lead to years of pressure and disappointment. Things changed dramatically when David's father, Mike, had a stroke. The family insisted we move into their home in Chicago to help care for him. I didn't want to. I loved our little apartment filled with memories and laughter. But family obligations prevailed, and we relocated to his parents' house. I thought it would be temporary, just a few months at most. Living with David's family was a big adjustment. The house was always bustling, filled with tension and unspoken rules. His mother, Susan, was especially difficult. She was a homemaker with very traditional views on marriage and motherhood. From the moment I stepped into their home, I felt the weight of her expectations. Susan believed a woman's worth came from her ability to bear children, and since David and I didn't have kids yet, I quickly became her target. At first, the criticism was subtle. "You should really learn to cook better," she'd say, eyeing my attempts in the kitchen. "David works hard. A wife should support him more." It stung, but I tried to brush it off. I focused on my career, working late hours, determined to show them I could contribute financially. I thought that if I worked hard enough, Susan would see my worth beyond the traditional role she expected of me. However, as months turned into years, the criticisms grew harsher. I remember one particular evening, after a long day at work, coming home to find Susan waiting for me. "You know, Emma, a real woman knows how to take care of her family. I just don't see how you fit into that picture," she sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. I felt crushed. Despite my accomplishments, I was made to feel inadequate. And David? At first, he stood up for me. "Mom, Emma works hard. We're trying to have a baby. These things take time," he would say. But as the pressure built, I could sense him starting to cave under his mother's expectations. I felt utterly alone. The breaking point came when David's sister, Megan, returned home unexpectedly. She was pregnant and recently divorced, and her arrival sent the household into a frenzy. Susan was overjoyed, and for good reason. A grandchild was on the way. But when she announced that Megan would need my room, I was taken aback. "Emma, you'll have to move to the balcony," Susan ordered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I did not expect it when my mother-in-law suddenly pushed me hard and spoke loudly. "You are not a real woman. You are a she-male. You cannot give birth." I was shocked, and my heart broke at these harsh words. I couldn't believe it. "Mom, that's not fair," David protested, but his voice was weak. I stood there in disbelief, feeling the weight of her words suffocating me. "You're not a real woman if you can't make sacrifices for family," Susan snapped at me, calling me names that cut deeper than I ever thought possible. "David, please," I begged, hoping he would stand by me. But he remained silent, caught between his wife and his mother. In that moment, I felt a rage boiling inside me. How could he let her talk to me like that? I decided right then that enough was enough. I moved to the balcony, but I also decided to take action. I couldn't keep giving my all to a family that didn't appreciate me. So, I stopped all financial support. I ceased paying for groceries and bills, effectively withdrawing my contribution. I felt empowered for the first time in ages, but it was a double-edged sword. The family relied on my income, and I knew it would hit them hard. As the days passed, the tension in the house escalated. Susan and David were furious, their financial strain becoming more evident. I could hear them arguing in the evenings, their voices raised, blaming each other for our predicament. I felt a strange sense of satisfaction, knowing I was finally taking control of my life. A month later, I received an apology from both David and Susan. They realized how much they relied on me, not just financially, but also to maintain harmony in the household. But my heart had hardened. Their apologies felt insincere, just another way to manipulate me back into their control. I had made my decision. I was done. The life I had envisioned for myself, one filled with love and mutual respect, was slipping away. I planned to file for divorce, packed my belongings, and began planning my escape to New York. I left behind a life that had become a cage, ready to reclaim my independence. Moving to New York was both terrifying and liberating. As I settled into my new apartment, a small but cozy space in a lively neighborhood, I felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. The city buzzed around me, people hustling, cars honking, life pulsing with energy. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating silence of David's family home, and for the first time in years, I could breathe. I quickly threw myself into my work at a new marketing firm. It felt invigorating to be surrounded by ambitious colleagues who shared my passion. I took on challenging projects, reigniting my creative spark and reminding myself of what I was capable of. Each success felt like a personal victory, a testament to my independence and resilience. However, despite my newfound freedom, memories of my past haunted me. I missed the idea of family, the love I once thought I had with David. I often found myself reflecting on the emotional scars left by my time with Susan. I spent sleepless nights wrestling with doubt. Had I made the right choice? The weight of those years lingered in my heart, a reminder of the struggles I had endured. One evening, as I was working late on a campaign, my phone buzzed. It was a message from David. "Can we talk? I miss you." My heart sank. I hadn't heard from him since I left. A mix of anger and longing flooded my mind. Part of me wanted to respond, to hear him out, but another part screamed to keep moving forward. After some deliberation, I agreed to meet him at a coffee shop in my neighborhood. When I walked in, I spotted him sitting in a corner, looking both relieved and anxious. His face brightened when he saw me, but I could sense the tension between us. "Emma," he said, standing up as I approached. "I'm really glad you came." He sounded sincere, yet uncertain. "Hi, David," I replied, forcing a smile. We sat down, the atmosphere thick with unspoken words. "I've missed you," he finally said, his gaze dropping to the table. "Things have been really hard at home. Mom keeps asking about you." My stomach tightened. "And what about you? How are you handling it?" "Honestly, it's tough. Mom is struggling, and she keeps trying to get me to convince you to come back." "She thinks you're the problem," he admitted, his voice wavering. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Me? I'm the problem? David, you saw how she treated me. I didn't leave for no reason." "I know, but it's complicated. She's my mom. I can't just ignore her," he said, sounding defensive. As we talked, I realized that while David hadn't changed, he was still caught in his family's web of expectations. I felt a flicker of hope that perhaps we could rebuild our relationship, but deep down, I knew I had to prioritize myself. "David, I've been rebuilding my life here," I said, meeting his eyes. "I'm happy. I don't want to go back to that toxic environment." His expression fell, and I could see the hurt in his eyes. "I don't want to lose you, Emma. I wish things could be different. It's not just about us anymore. I need to find my own path," I replied, tears welling up. "I can't keep sacrificing my happiness for your family's approval." After that meeting, I walked through the city, feeling a mix of relief and sorrow. I had finally asserted my independence, but the pain of leaving David behind lingered. The city felt alive, and I reminded myself that I was finally in control of my destiny. Days turned into weeks, and I immersed myself in my work. I made new friends who inspired me and encouraged my ambitions. I took classes to expand my skills, pushing myself further than I ever thought possible. However, the pressure from David's family never fully vanished. Susan called occasionally, trying to guilt-trip me. "You were part of this family, Emma. You can't just abandon us," she would say, her tone harsh and accusatory. Each call left me drained, but I held firm. "I'm not abandoning anyone, Susan. I'm choosing to live for myself now." I was determined to protect my peace. One day, I received a frantic call from Megan. "Emma, I really need to talk to you." "It's about Mom," she said, her voice trembling. I could hear the desperation and worry in her tone. We met at a cafe near my apartment. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and puffy. "Mom hasn't stopped pressuring me since you left," she confessed. "She keeps telling me I'm the reason you left and that I need to convince you to come back." My heart sank as I listened. "Megan, you can't take that on. It's not your responsibility. You have your own life to live and a baby on the way. You don't need to bear the burden of our family's dysfunction." Tears welled up in her eyes. But she won't stop. I feel like I'm constantly failing her, and now I'm scared I'll fail my own child too. I reached across the table and held her hand. You're not failing anyone. You have to put yourself and your baby first. Set boundaries with her. Don't let her guilt you into sacrificing your happiness. Megan nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. I knew it wouldn't be easy for her to stand up to Susan, but I hoped my words would help her find the courage to protect herself. A few days later, David reached out, asking if we could meet. I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to reopen old wounds, but I agreed. We met at a park, and I was struck by how tired he looked, like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Emma, I've been thinking a lot about everything, he began. I realize how much I let my family come between us. I should have stood up for you, but I didn't, and I'm so sorry. His apologies stirred something in me, but I knew it wasn't enough. David, I appreciate your words, but it's too late. I've filed for divorce. I need to move forward, and that means leaving all of this behind. He looked devastated but nodded slowly. I understand. I just wish I had done things differently. I wish things had been different too, but we can't change the past. I have to do what's right for me now, I said firmly. As I walked away from that conversation, I felt a strange sense of closure. I had made my choice, and it was the right one for me. It was time to let go and focus on building the life I deserved. In the following weeks, I found myself growing more confident and at peace. I threw myself into my work and even took up painting again. Each brushstroke felt like a reclaiming of my identity, a way to express all the emotions I had kept locked away for so long. Then, one evening, Megan called again, but this time her voice was stronger. Emma, I finally told Mom I need space. It wasn't easy, but I did it. I'm trying to set those boundaries you talked about. I felt a surge of pride. That's incredible, Megan. I'm so proud of you. It's not easy, but it's a step in the right direction. As we ended the call, I felt a sense of hope. Maybe my journey wasn't just about finding my own freedom, but also about helping Megan find hers. I knew there were still challenges ahead, but I was ready to face them. I was finally learning to let go of the past and embrace the future I had always wanted. After filing for divorce, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and fear. It was a tough decision, but I knew it was the right one. I needed to free myself from the toxic environment and finally live for me. I had spent so much time trying to fit into a life that wasn't mine, and now it was time to move forward, leaving everything behind. The divorce process was exhausting. David tried to convince me to reconsider, saying he would stand up to his mother and that we could start fresh. But I knew that going back would only trap me again. I told him firmly, David, I'm done. This isn't just about your mother. It's about me needing my own life, one where I'm not constantly judged or undervalued. He looked devastated, but he knew I meant it. When the papers were signed, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was officially free from a marriage that had drained me emotionally. It wasn't just about ending things with David, but about reclaiming my identity and my voice. Susan, predictably, didn't take the news well. She called me furious, accusing me of tearing the family apart. How could you do this to us? To David? You're selfish, she shouted, her voice full of bitterness. But this time, I didn't let her words affect me. Susan, I'm not responsible for your happiness or your family's. I need to take care of myself now, I said calmly, feeling a strength I hadn't felt before. I hung up, knowing it was the last time I'd allow her to manipulate me. I decided to cut ties with all of them, including Megan. As much as I cared about her, I realized I needed to distance myself completely to heal. I sent her a heartfelt message, explaining that I needed space to move on. It hurt to let go, but I knew it was necessary. In the months that followed, I poured myself into building my new life. I focused on my career, taking on challenging projects that reignited my passion for marketing. I moved into a beautiful new apartment overlooking Central Park, a place that truly felt like mine. I began exploring the city, joining art classes, and making new friends who valued and respected me for who I was. It wasn't always easy. There were days when I felt lonely, wondering if I had made the right choices. But those moments were fleeting. Each time, I reminded myself of the strength it took to walk away from a life that was suffocating me. One day, As I was walking through Central Park, I realized just how far I had come. I had let go of the pain and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. I was no longer the woman who felt trapped and powerless. I was independent, confident, and finally at peace. Looking back, I see that my journey wasn't just about leaving a toxic marriage or an overbearing family. It was about finding myself again, my voice, my strength, my worth. I had to let go of everything that was holding me back to embrace the future I deserved. Now, I wake up every day excited for what's ahead. I've started mentoring young women in my industry, sharing my experiences, and helping them navigate their own paths. It's incredibly fulfilling, knowing that I can use my story to inspire others to stand up for themselves and never settle for less than they deserve. I've learned that true independence isn't just about being alone. It's about living authentically, making choices that align with who you are, and refusing to let anyone diminish your light. I'm proud of the woman I've become, and I'm excited for the future I'm building, one that's truly my own. I'm not sure what's next, but I know one thing for certain: I will never again compromise my happiness for anyone. I've finally found my freedom, and I'm not letting it go.
Ugh, I never wanted to go home for the holidays. My older sister exclaimed, slamming the table and standing up with such vigor. I had never seen Diane look so fierce and imposing, almost like a wrathful deity. It was so frightening, it felt like it could haunt my dreams. That New Year's remains an unforgettable turning point in my life. My name is Kathy. Just the other day, my daughter asked me, "Why do you bother saying hello to telemarketers, Mom? It's just a sales pitch. And they can't even see you anyway." I let her know that it's just good manners. To be grateful and considerate, no matter the circumstances. But she just said, and brushed it off, slightly breaking my heart. You'll understand when you start working. Today, I want to share a story that happened to me 5 years ago. I'd really like you to hear it. At that time, I was a hard-working career woman at a foreign company in New York. However, a phone call changed my life drastically. My mom, who raised my older sister, Diane, and me as a single mom, had broken her leg and was hospitalized. Living in New York, neither Diane nor I were at our family home anymore. Since Mom was hospitalized, one of us had to go back to the countryside. Diane, who ran a law firm, couldn't leave her responsibilities. I had important roles too, but I was more replaceable. So, I took it upon myself to take a leave of absence and return to the countryside. But right before I was set to leave, my company told me that if my leave became long-term, I would have to step down from my position and be reassigned to a different department upon return. Essentially, they indicated that they did not need someone who would be absent. As a single woman at the time, even before announcing my leave, I felt pressured, as if they expected me to eventually leave due to marriage and childbirth. While society now better understands women's roles at work, back then, despite the company's outward rhetoric, the underlying belief was that women are likely to take leaves, so we don't want to keep them in leadership positions. Few understood, and I often felt envied by some male colleagues, because I held a higher position than they did. This demotion seemed easily imagined as someone complaining that you can't rely on someone who takes leave, and it's hard to back them up when they return. If only the duration of my leave had been clear. Depending on my mom's rehabilitation progress, she might need support even after her discharge. She couldn't drive, meaning someone needed to assist her with hospital visits and shopping. It was clear my leave would not be short. With no set end date, and no return to my previous position in sight, the situation was increasingly uncomfortable. That's when I decided to resign. I moved out of my apartment and committed to supporting my mom full-time. If it helps mom recover, it's worth it. But when I first saw her at the hospital, I somewhat regretted coming back. Her first words were, "You hardly ever show your face, but now you come because of this." Admittedly, I hadn't been able to visit home often due to work, especially after promotions in my 30s that made visits rare. But to say such things to a daughter who had quit her job to return felt unfair. Mom was likely stressed from her injury and unfamiliar hospital life, so I let it slide at the time. However, her snide remarks continued with each visit. Once discharged, the minor jabs turned into outright verbal abuse. Struggling with mobility in a non-barrier-free home, she often lashed out. I was assisting her with everything, but once when I was momentarily in the bathroom, she hurled the remote at me for being slow. I wondered if it was something urgent, but it turned out she just wanted some tea. Honestly, I thought all this anger over just that. But right now, I am acting as my mom's hands and feet, helping around the house. The one who can't move freely and is suffering the most must be my mom. I thought this was a time to quietly endure and support her, so I resolved to be patient. However, my mom not only trampled over my consideration, but it felt like she stomped on it and then jumped on it repeatedly with great force. Mom would frequently get angry and throw things, aiming for my face with remotes and phones. It's a wonder my reflexes hadn't sharpened from dodging objects, almost as if I could evade arrows like the legendary warrior. Her reasons were often unreasonable: "You're late, your touch is too strong during care. You made a face for a moment." Honestly, I wasn't doing those things. My care was careful but firm enough to support her. To avoid complaints about being late, I began holding off on bathroom breaks. And I hurried through baths with astonishing speed. I wasn't too happy with how my face looked, and with everything going on, it wouldn't be weird if I appeared upset. But I tried to keep a smile on, even when she said I looked like I was frowning, which I didn't think was true. Eventually, her verbal abuse extended beyond care-related issues. "You're useless, you'll never get rehired. How long do you plan to stay in our house? Why did you quit? If you were working, you could have renovated the house to make it easier for me to live in." Day by day, I faced her anger. The gratitude I had for the mom who raised me alone was dwindling to ashes. I hadn't wanted to quit. I had tried to take a leave, but it hadn't been approved. I had many things I still wanted to do, but I had convinced myself that if I could devote plenty of time for the mom who raised me alone, it was for the best. Come to think of it, Diane hasn't visited home much either. She didn't even come to visit this time. And yet, why do I, who quit my job to come back, have to endure being spoken to like this? My mom has always favored Diane, who became a lawyer. This is because, in the past, our relatives harshly criticized her for raising children alone, questioning whether she could really raise us to be decent people. My dad had an affair and left home while my mom was pregnant with me. The marriage between my dad and mom wasn't well received by those around them to begin with, and upon learning of the divorce, my grandma hysterically scolded my mom, saying, "I told you so." Furthermore, she forcefully arranged a marriage meeting for my mom with a much older man, arguing that my mom could remarry while she was still young, as it would be impossible for her to live alone. Of course, my mom furiously refused such a marriage, and my grandma tried to prevent her from staying single by involving other relatives. As a result, This incident led to a severance of ties between my grandma and my mom. My mom was really eager for Diane and me to be the perfect daughters. I was always getting scolded as a kid if things didn't turn out how she wanted. She never complimented me for getting good grades, but she would get upset if I didn't do well. Often as a child, I felt like taunting her, asking, "Did you always score so high when you were a kid?" I had such rebellious thoughts. But Diane was the exemplary student my mom wanted. Thus, Diane became a lawyer. As soon as she did, my mom, who had cut ties with my grandma and other relatives, started contacting them to brag about Diane. Needless to say, this made us somewhat unpopular among the relatives. I wasn't a foolish child either. I did well in school and landed a job at a respectable company, but to my mom, the lawyer title Diane held was significant. I was always compared to her and treated as the lesser child. However, it wasn't as if she threw things or hurled abuse like she did with me. Diane seemed to be treated more kindly, or so it appeared, and her behavior was also more gentle. The stress of the injury and the considerable support my mom received from the nurses at the hospital, who attended to her every need, seemed to have created an expectation in her mind that it was normal for everyone to comply with her demands. A friend mentioned that people can develop mental health issues after being discharged, similar to what was happening with Kathy's mom. I attempted to take her to a psychiatrist, but, as expected, she lashed out. I persisted and finally managed to take her, but the results showed no issues. It couldn't be true, could it? Surely there must be some diagnosis. But it turned out that my mom's transformation wasn't due to any illness. It appeared to be just plain selfishness. As I was running out of options, her verbal abuse worsened, and I faced my first New Year's since resigning with her taunting, "See, I told you I wasn't sick. You're trying to make me out to be ill." This year, Diane said she'd come home because she was worried about our situation. And for the first time in a long time, the three of us gathered. But there was no festive atmosphere of a family enjoying finger food together. Instead, I served while Diane was treated like a guest. And the new year was anything but relaxed. "Kathy, serve some drinks to me and your sister." Maybe for Diane, but Mom, you shouldn't drink with your legs still unstable. What if you fall? Shut up. Have you finally started talking back to your mom? That's not what You call me a sick person and show me no kindness despite my disability. You don't contribute at all, just living off what we have. Excuse me, how could you say that? Quiet. 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 I don't need a failure like you in my house. I thought I finally had someone to boast about to the relatives. But then you became unemployed. Get out of here now. With those words, my mom threw the cracker that was on the dining table. At that moment, I finally understood the true meaning of her words. I thought she was just selfishly lashing out at me because I rarely came home. But that wasn't it. No matter how caring I was, my mom was cold to me because I had deviated from her ideal image of a daughter. She wanted us to remain elite, hard-working daughters living in New York. But what was I supposed to do in response? Abandon our injured mom together as sisters? Or should I have commuted by bullet train to support her? Cling to my current company despite knowing there's no place for me after returning? It's my life. Am I really obligated to meet such expectations? Something inside me had always been taut like a string, and it felt like it had just snapped. Enough. Understood. Then it's goodbye forever. The moment I glared at my mom and shouted that, it was then. Ugh, I never wanted to come home for the holidays. With that, Diane slammed the table and got up quickly. What? My mom was taken aback by the sudden outburst. Normally, Diane is the calmest and most composed person in our house. I had never seen her angry. I nearly questioned if it was actually her who said that. But Diane was biting her lip, trying to keep her anger in check. That look on her face, those were definitely words from Diane. If you had just kept quiet. What is this? It's understandable to have me bring the meals since Mom's legs are bad. But constantly telling me to do the laundry or go shopping. And then to remake the tea because it's lukewarm? Kathy barely has a moment to eat. I thought it was strange how much thinner Kathy looked compared to the last time I saw her. And on top of that, calling her a parasite and a failure. Do you not understand why Kathy quit the job she loved to come back here? Diane finished her rant in one breath, panting heavily. Oh, Diane, it's not like that. This child even took me to a psychiatrist. Doubting me, she's just a terrible daughter. It's normal to think there might be a mental issue if you're screamed at every day for such crazy reasons. If it's painful, at least try to limit your whims. You're pushing your ideals on Kathy too much. No, but, I don't think she needed to quit her job. Then could you have lived alone, Mom? Even now you barely move on your own? No. Because that leg of yours is practically healed, right? What? Both my mom and I were shocked by Diane's revelation. Earlier, you walked a few steps without your cane when it rolled away. I had to laugh when you hurriedly yelled at Kathy to get it for you. It's not like that. I didn't realize. My mom was desperately trying to explain herself, but honestly, I was too exhausted to do anything but think, really? I hadn't noticed at all. Oh, this is truly shocking. Give me back the months I've spent, Mother. Knowing now that her leg was healed. The mom who I thought needed my kindness suddenly seemed despicable. Why are you so cold to Mom? Diane was always the perfect daughter, my pride and joy. Because, Mom, ever since I became a lawyer, you've just been after my money. Kindness also fades away. What? Once again, I was taken aback by Diane's words. Mother looked pale, well, practically white by now. From the way you're acting. Kathy hasn't been hit with this. I've been hit up for money almost immediately after becoming a lawyer because it's hard to live alone and all that. Was that also why you hardly came home? That's part of it. I also just didn't like Mom anymore and found it bothersome. Diane answered nonchalantly, causing our mom to exclaim in shock. Hate. Diane, that's terrible. Huh? Which is worse? You only love my money. It's not like that. What's different? I know. You're begging for funds, and that injury? It's all due to your gambling problem. Huh? Diane, what do you mean? My head couldn't keep up with further revelations from Diane. The first call about Mom's accident came to me, right? Yes. They told me Mom had collapsed at a casino, tripped over some slot coin, and banged her knee hard. What? Let me make it clearer. The money she squeezed from me was used for gambling because she was short on living expenses. And the injury happened at a casino. She's a full-blown gambling addict. Wow. Our mom shrank under our disapproving gazes, hitting the mark. The last time I talked to Mom, I said I'm not giving you any more money. This time she must have been counting on Kathy. But that fell through when Kathy quit her job, right? That wasn't my intention. As Diane spoke, tears began to well up in our mom's eyes. So, basically, Mom wanted me to stay as the convenient daughter who works at a reputable company to not embarrass her in front of relatives, and as her personal wallet. But since I resigned, you don't need such a daughter anymore. As I glared at her, my mom awkwardly looked away. After milking Diane for money and she wasn't too fond of you, you turned to me? Don't you underestimate your daughters too much? Shut up. I raised you both just fine. So I should get to have a little fun with gambling as I get older. Just a little is fine. But gambling to the point of borrowing money from others is not okay. As we became respectable, Mom, you've just gone downhill. At my words, Diane burst out laughing. Really not a cute kid, huh? Has always been. Could it be that I take after my mom? But honestly, who can still be a nice daughter after facing this much ridicule? I'm not that delusional. That's true. Diane agreed with me, nodding emphatically. Rather, I should be thankful that such sensible daughters could come from such a mom. If I have to listen to you, that's it. I'm cutting ties with you. Huh? For real? Yay! I spontaneously cheered and went for a high five with Diane. What a welcome offer! No more living under Mom's wrath. And I can even look for a job. Oh, and if you have any troubles, don't involve me anymore. What? Mom started to panic at my words. Huh? What's that reaction? You're the one who said cutting ties. You don't say that and then expect help when in trouble. But we're family, we should support each other. That's why, if we're cutting ties, it means the family bond is severed, right? You just said cutting ties, Mom. And you mentioned support. But all the support has been coming from us. I get it. My bad. I take it back. I can't believe I'd be alone in this house. Ah, that's right. Diane. You'll stay, won't you? No, I won't. Diane decisively cut off our mom, who was almost clinging to her. They say money issues can end relationships. And I don't want to lend money to Mom anymore. Dealing with a gambling addict is just too troublesome. Trust the elite lawyer to have seen all sorts of situations. It's probably an occupational hazard by now. At my jest, Diane laughed heartily. Our sisterly reunion turned out to be quite dramatic. But it seems our closeness will continue as ever. Aren't you homeless if you leave here? You probably want to move out today. Yeah, well, I can't exactly get a house contract right away. Maybe I'll go to a hotel. You could come to my place. Huh, really? Diane. Would a sister refuse to live with her sibling? Well, maybe some would. Which is it? I wouldn't mind. It sounds fun. Let's enjoy our single lives together. As we continued our conversation with laughter, Mom approached us trembling. Please don't take my words seriously, could you reconsider? With tears in her eyes, she pleaded. I refuse. It was perhaps the only time Diane and I were ever so united in our resolve. Afterward, I quickly left the family home and stayed at Diane's place until I found a job. Diane said, You must have had a tough time at home. I'm sorry for leaving everything to you even though I was busy. And didn't even charge me rent. I felt a bit guilty, so I did the housework. Otherwise, I might truly become the parasite Mom mentioned. After living modestly with Diane for a while, I found a job and we each began living separately again. It's like getting back to normal life. Mom wrote to us over and over asking for support, but we both chose not to answer. We had enough reasons to give up on her. It was her own doing. In truth, Mom's legs are fine now. And she even took a part-time job claiming she was out of money. Though it seems she was fired soon after for poor attendance. She kept going gambling during breaks and didn't return on time, which led to her dismissal. She repeated this behavior at the next job too. With her age, it's hard to find re-employment. And she's living in poverty, unable to quit gambling. Maybe she thinks gambling won't betray her like her daughters did. But that's not my concern anymore. It's been 15 years since then. Mom has finally quit gambling. More because she ran out of funds than by choice, and ended up deep in debt. I was surrounded by some tough-looking guys saying I had a duty to repay her debts. But thanks to my lawyer sister, we managed to get through without issue. I wouldn't have known what to do on my own. Probably would have ended up paying just because they said so. Really saved me. We still don't talk to Mom, and I doubt that will ever change. I don't want it to. Diane has already considered legal actions. Planning for the worst, ready to cut ties formally if needed. By the way, Diane later married a fellow lawyer. They often argue about work directions, but she seems to enjoy it like a debate club. A marriage among the wealthy is like a whole new level, isn't it? I, on the other hand, ended up marrying someone from an advertising agency I met through work in IT. Completely unrelated to my previous job. Honestly, we don't earn much. Maybe I earned more in my previous job? But we have more holidays. And I can spend plenty of time with my husband and daughter. I help her with cooking lessons on holidays and, embarrassingly, go on dates with my husband. It's fulfilling. Happy despite not earning much? Of course. Money is necessary. But it doesn't alone bring happiness. Otherwise, a mom, who could spend freely even in debt, would surely be happy now. What's important isn't money, academic background, or career. I've learned from my relationship with my parents that none of that has any real value. What truly matters is whether there are relationships around you where hearts connect. Even if you have money, if you can't be your true self around those people, it's suffocating, right? It's the same thing. I may not be enjoying a lavish lifestyle in a high-end apartment, eating fancy foods every day, but I have a teenage daughter who loves to cook alongside me, a husband who still compliments my haircuts, and coworkers I trust completely. I can proudly say I'm the happiest person ever.
1 minute my phone was against my ear. The next I'm an echo of horrified surprise. "I don't want to be with you anymore," said not in quite those words from a voice acid and sharp. "Why do you always crash when I call?" But he whined, unaware of how quickly I was driven to the hospital in fear for our unborn child's life. "We are here ready to eat your food, and we're starving, but you are in the hospital relaxing," he said angrily without a care. He then announced he was fed up and swanning off to his parents for dinner without me. Even over the phone, I could feel his anger and shame for him, projecting me as responsible for this worst-case situation on Earth, which filled my head panic-stricken us. Our baby has not arrived yet in a world with hungry wolves around every corner. Once I was a passionate cosmetic salesperson, recognized for my dedication and hard work, with a collection of awards and a reputation for excellence. I loved my job and the confidence it brought me. Meeting my husband seemed like a fairy tale, leading to a whirlwind romance and marriage. But the joy of discovering my pregnancy came with a tough decision to leave my job due to the risk of miscarriage, a choice made with our family's future in mind. As I navigated the challenges of pregnancy, my husband's support waned, transforming from excitement to frustration. Simple tasks became monumental, and my attempts to meet his expectations often fell short. "Where's my lunch?" He'd ask, only to scoff at the simple sandwiches I managed to prepare, citing my inability to handle smells. His words stung. Pregnancy is not an illness. He dismissed my struggles, leaving me to fend for myself. This shift in his behavior was a stark contrast to the man I fell in love with. His companionship at doctor's visits faded, as did his empathy for the household chores that now seemed insurmountable to me. Our home, once a place of mutual respect and love, felt increasingly like a battleground, with me trying to protect not just my well-being, but that of our unborn child, clinging to the hope that somehow we'd find our way back to understanding and support. Perhaps he's just exhausted. He's taken on a mentorship role for a newcomer at work, and it's been demanding. This might explain why he's been less patient and more irritable with me lately. I keep telling myself that once our baby arrives, his hectic schedule will calm down and we'll find our rhythm as a family. "It's going to be okay," I whisper, caressing my growing belly, trying to stay positive despite the struggles with my changing body and our strained relationship. Yet things haven't gotten better between my husband and me. To add to the tension, my in-laws have started to drop by without notice, increasing my stress levels. They question the cleanliness of our home and express concern over how we'll manage once the baby is here. Despite their criticisms, they expect hospitality and demand I prepare something for them to eat on the spot. Caught off guard and without any preparations, I feel overwhelmed and criticized for not being a better host. Each visit from my in-laws ends with them leaving in disappointment, my husband siding with them, never defending me. Doing my best isn't enough. I'm left feeling inadequate in their eyes. On one such visit, after being sent out to buy groceries while heavily pregnant, I collapsed from the strain. I woke up in the hospital, learning I had passed out from overexertion, but thankfully our baby was still safe. The doctors advised a few days of rest in the hospital. Seeing missed calls from my husband on my phone, I realized he must have been worried when I didn't return from the store. Yet when I finally called him back, hoping for some concern or relief in his voice, I was met with anger instead. "Where have you been?" He demanded, his words harsh and unforgiving, as if my health and our baby's safety were of no concern to him. Hearing his harsh words, I shuddered. "I'm sorry, I collapsed at the grocery store and was rushed to the hospital. They've put me on IV fluids and advised me to stay here for a few days for observation," I explained. But his response was cold and impatient, as if my well-being mattered less than his inconvenience. "You collapsed and I'm supposed to care. Why don't you answer when I call?" "You're so slow," his words cut deep, and I couldn't bear the thought of our unborn child being exposed to such negativity. "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby." I tried to reason with him, but it was futile. He continued, undeterred by my plea for kindness. "We're here starving, waiting on your terrible cooking, and you're just taking it easy in the hospital." His intent to dine out with his parents and leave me to fend for myself, even in my condition, was clear. His voice, filled with anger and devoid of concern, made me recoil. Not wanting to expose my baby to any harsher words, I ended the call, feeling utterly alone and disheartened. As I returned to my hospital room, tears began to stream down my face uncontrollably. It was in this vulnerable moment a familiar and comforting voice reached out to me. "Are you okay?" I looked up to find Helen, a customer I had grown close to during my days as a cosmetic salesperson, offering me a towel. Recognizing her immediately, relief and warmth flooded through me. "Helen, it's really you. I'm so glad you remember me." Our reunion felt like a twist of fate, a much-needed reminder of kindness and human connection in my darkest hour. Helen had been more than just a customer. She was a woman who, after a difficult divorce, had lost her self-confidence and had stopped wearing makeup entirely. I remembered the day I approached her at the cosmetics counter, offering to help her try some makeup. The transformation in her appearance was more than just physical. It was a moment of emotional healing for her, a step towards regaining her self-esteem. Over time, Helen became more than a customer. She became a friend. But suddenly, 5 years before I left my job, Helen stopped coming, and I had always wondered what had become of her. Now here she was, a beacon of support when I needed it most. I had returned hoping to reconnect with you, Helen. To my surprise, when I visited your previous place of work, I learned you had left, which really took me aback, Helen shared, her voice filled with a mix of surprise and disappointment. I apologize for suddenly dropping in. I was actually abroad for work. You see, I run a business overseas, and it's been quite hectic. It's been ages since I've had the chance to enjoy a moment of peace. So once things settled down a bit, I decided to come back. And would you believe it? Right after I tried to find you, I ended up here with appendicitis, she explained, her laughter lightening the mood despite the circumstance. It's just in the early stages, so medication should do the trick. Plus, if I were still abroad, the treatment cost would have been astronomical. In a way, I'm relieved it happened here, Helen continued, her optimism and familiar smile infectious. This unexpected reunion lifted my spirits, and we found ourselves joyfully reminiscing about the past. As the conversation deepened, Helen, with her ever-so-kind smile, gently probed, "You don't have to share if you're uncomfortable." But I couldn't help but notice you were upset earlier. What happened? Trusting Helen as I did, more than just as a former customer, but as a true friend, I opened up about the struggles with my husband and in-laws. I'm really worried about bringing my child into such an environment, afraid they'll be treated the same way I am. And now, without my job, the idea of living independently, let alone with a child, seems daunting. To my astonishment, Helen made an incredibly generous offer. "I happen to have an apartment that you could use. I manage a few properties, part of a project I developed on land I inherited. It's a cozy 2-bedroom with a separate bathroom, soundproof walls, and it's situated in a safe neighborhood close to amenities like supermarkets and a police station. There's no need for a deposit right now, and you can start paying rent whenever you're settled. It's a really good deal. What do you think?" Helen's enthusiasm was palpable, and her offer was so sincere it brought a laugh of disbelief from me. "Are you sure you can offer it at such favorable terms?" Overwhelmed by her kindness, Helen said, "Absolutely. I know you well enough to trust you'll take good care of the place. Plus, I believe it's important to support each other in times of need. You're more than welcome to stay there," she assured me, her generosity shining through. Helen's unexpected kindness was a beacon of hope, offering not just a place to stay, but the possibility of a new beginning. Eager to lend a hand to someone she valued, Helen offered her apartment to me, an act of kindness I couldn't refuse. Gratefully, I accepted. Days later, after doctors gave me the green light, I left the hospital and, without a second thought, moved directly into the apartment Helen had prepared for me. She had effortlessly arranged everything over a phone call, showcasing her remarkable generosity. I didn't return to the home I shared with my husband. Instead, I embraced this new beginning in Helen's welcoming and cozy apartment. Although I couldn't shake off the guilt of not paying rent immediately, Helen brushed off my concerns with a laugh, insisting it was all fine. During my husband's working hours, I stealthily returned to our shared home to retrieve my belongings, realizing how little there felt truly mine. The house felt as empty as my heart did within its walls. Helen's support didn't stop with the apartment. She introduced me to a lawyer who had once helped her, solidifying my decision to pursue a divorce. The lawyer's encouragement was a beacon of hope, and with each hospital visit confirming the health of my growing baby, my resolve strengthened. On one such visit, as I stepped outside, my heart sank at the sight of my husband waiting for me. Panic surged through me, and though I tried to escape, my pregnant condition slowed me down. He confronted me about the lawyer and our living situation, his grip tight on my arm. I stood firm, insisting on communication through the lawyer for any discussions regarding the divorce, compensation, and child support. His refusal to provide support and demands for me to return were met with my refusal. As he tried to forcibly take me back, a young woman intervened. Rebecca, as she was called, knew my husband and immediately took a protective stance in front of me. Their familiar exchange did little to conceal the tension. Rebecca challenged my husband George, refusing to let him take me against my will. Her determination and the threat of involving the police were enough to alter the dynamics of the situation, providing me with a glimmer of hope and the courage to stand up for myself in this unexpected confrontation. When my husband heard the mention of the police, he looked scared and quickly left. I felt a rush of relief that made my legs weak. Rebecca quickly came to my side to support me. "Are you okay?" she asked as I apologized, explaining how relieved I felt. Rebecca didn't hesitate to call a taxi for me, insisting on making sure I got home safely. Even though I felt bad for the trouble, she assured me it was no bother. When I told Rebecca my address, she was surprised to find out I lived just below her. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca, cheerful and caring, turned out to be a new employee at my husband George's workplace. She had reported George's inappropriate behavior, leading to his removal as her mentor. George was known for his lack of empathy towards female employees, making insensitive comments about personal issues like menstruation and marriage. Rebecca shared how George's behavior wasn't just a problem at work. I knew it all too well from how he treated me during my pregnancy. 3 weeks after our meeting, Rebecca and I had grown close, sharing dinners like friends. She updated me that George had been transferred to a subsidiary company after a series of complaints and issues at work. Interestingly, Rebecca was the daughter of Helen, a successful businesswoman who managed several properties, including the apartment I was staying in. George had bragged about handling Helen's account, but his behavior led to a shift in his professional standing. Helen had pushed for George's transfer after learning about his actions both at work and towards me. Rebecca, determined and capable, had taken steps to address workplace issues without relying on her mother. But once she realized I was connected to her mother, she felt compelled to act. Helen encouraged Rebecca to present all evidence against George, leading to his transfer. Now, with his decreased income and increased workload, George's position had significantly changed. Helen, with her experience, advised me not to give in to any of George's attempts to gain sympathy, emphasizing the importance of staying firm in my decision to divorce. Her advice, coming from someone with her background and knowledge, was incredibly reassuring. After deciding to divorce, George tried to reach out through the lawyer, sharing how tough work was and how much he missed me. He even said he was sorry and wanted me back, but I stayed firm on my decision to divorce. Supported by Helen, George had no choice but to agree to the divorce and the terms for child support and damages, which he would pay over time. However, my next big challenge was dealing with my in-laws, especially my father-in-law, who was overly excited about the baby being a boy. I sensed trouble brewing, and soon enough, my in-laws made their move. One day, as I was heading out, my father-in-law grabbed my arm. He had followed Rebecca, thinking to confront her, and then saw me. He demanded that I hand over my baby once born, claiming the baby was the family's heir. Despite my attempts to free myself, his grip was strong. Just then, a firm voice demanded he let me go, followed by a swift move that sent him flying with a judo technique. It turned out Rebecca had mastered judo to protect herself and her mom during tough times. She's a top-ranked judoka with national titles to her name. Rebecca confronted my father-in-law, criticizing him for overlooking George's actions and trying to meddle in my life. She defended my right to start anew, emphasizing that interfering was the last thing they should do. The sound of sirens was getting closer, and it turned out Rebecca had called for help before coming to rescue me. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting nearby in the car, watched quietly as the police arrived and took both her and my father-in-law away. My father-in-law ended up being arrested, and after some reflection, my mother-in-law decided to divorce him. She wanted to start over and live a life not dictated by others, choosing to move back to the countryside. George tried to convince his mother to let him come with her, saying he was tired of his job and the lawyers, but she firmly rejected him. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law expressed her apologies to me and left behind some money as a gesture of goodwill. Helen explained to me that it's common for people to feel lost after leaving a marriage, and that the money was likely my mother-in-law's way of saying sorry and supporting my son's future. I was surprised by her support, considering her past behavior, but grateful for her attempt to make amends. After finalizing the divorce, I gave birth to a healthy boy. My mother-in-law settled in the countryside, choosing a life of solitude over staying with George. When my father-in-law was released, he discovered the house was gone, demolished by my mother-in-law before she left. He ended up moving in with George, which only led to more trouble, and eventually George's resignation from his job due to a damaged reputation. Despite everything, child support payments continued to arrive reliably, likely managed by Helen and the lawyer. Rebecca, for her part, received recognition at work and became a project leader, much admired by her colleagues. Helen's projects, including women-only properties and housing for foreigners, were thriving. As for me, once my son was old enough, I planned to return to work. Helen had offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. Helen continued to support me and showed affection for my son as if he were her own grandchild. Rebecca also made time to visit us. Both of them reminded me of the strength and kindness that had helped me through the toughest times. I was determined to be just as strong and protective of my son, inspired by the incredible women who had supported me. As the Wilson family's second daughter, I had to live in Jessica's shadow growing up. Our parents said she was flawless in every aspect, and she was 5 years older. I was taught this lesson at a young age, and it was repeated every day in both significant and minor ways. I was thrilled to show my parents that I had gotten an A on my arithmetic test when I was 6 years old. They were admiring Jessica's new dancing move as they were in the kitchen. Mother remarked, "That's nice, honey," without even glancing at my paper. "But look at your sister's pirouette." I silently made my way to my room after standing there with my test till the paper became limp in my palms. The pattern remained constant. I got her hand-me-downs, while Jessica got new things from the mall. They got her the newest iPhone when she requested a phone at the age of 12. I was told to be thankful when I received Jessica's old flip phone on my 12th birthday. Dad used to say, "Your sister is going places," if I ventured to voice my displeasure. She needs these things for her future. My future didn't seem to require much investment. The same material was used to make our paternal grandparents, who had a swimming pool and a well-kept lawn in a posh area of town. Grandma Margaret always greeted Jessica with big hugs and enthusiastic squeals when we came, while I received a distracted pat on the head. She would exclaim, "Oh, Sarah," as if she had just realized I was there. You've grown. However, Christmas when I was 8 years old truly made the point. Jessica opened a brand new laptop that she needed for her coursework. I received several pencils and a bag of notebooks. "We're being practical," Grandpa Richard said, grinning patronizingly. "This is more your speed, isn't it?" However, my mother's parents' home served as my own haven. On the opposite side of town, Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George occupied a little ranch-style house. Something extraordinary occurred there. I was given the respect I deserved. When I spoke, they would genuinely pay attention. They put my artwork next to Jessica's on their refrigerator. When I visited, they prepared my favorite dishes because they remembered them. Jessica detested going there. She would gripe, "It's so boring. They don't even have a pool. And Grandma Eleanor never lets me choose what we watch on TV." She thus stopped coming, so I had them all to myself. I spent my afternoons with Eleanor and George's while our parents were busy escorting Jessica to her never-ending schedule of events. Ballet 1 month, horseback riding the next, and violin lessons she would stop after 3 weeks. They helped me with my homework, showed me how to bake cookies, and never once made comparisons between me and my sister. My parents made the ultimate decision on my value to the family when I was 10 years old. In what they referred to as a family meeting, the sentencing was set long before the trial even started, yet it seemed more like a trial. It was an October Sunday afternoon. The 6 of us sat down in our living room, Jessica and I sitting on chairs we had brought in from the dining room, both sets of grandparents on the matching sofas, and Mom and Dad standing by the fireplace. The air was thick with artificial significance. Dad started off by saying, "We need to discuss something serious," with his hands clenched behind his back like a CEO announcing layoffs. As you know, college education isn't getting any cheaper. I saw Jessica sit up straight in her chair and brush her flawless blonde hair. She was already rehearsing her future college student posture at the age of 15. I already knew where this was headed, so I sat still with my hands folded in my lap. Mom went on, looking at Jessica. "We've been saving since the girls were born. But with the current economy, well, we can only afford to send one of them to college." The subsequent delay was only for theatrical effect, similar to how TV shows create tension before revealing the clear winner, and it wasn't actually a pause at all. "Jessica will be starting college in 3 years, Dad declared. She has demonstrated exceptional talent in a wide range of fields. We must encourage her to reach her full potential." He then turned to face me, his face displaying a mixture of contempt and phony pity. "Sarah, you're unique, my dear. You are more equipped for hands-on work. College isn't actually necessary for you." Dad's mother, Grandma Margaret, gave a hearty nod. The woman said, "Jessica is so gifted. She possessed natural elegance, according to her dancing instructor only last week. She must have the greatest education available." As I sat there, I felt less and less like Jessica, not gifted enough, not valuable enough to invest in. Now the well-known statement has just been formally sealed and stamped. But then something unexpected happened. Grandpa George stood up, his face red with anger. "This is absolutely unfair," he declared. "How dare you write off a 10-year-old child like this?" George, my father, started, but Grandma Eleanor cut him off. "If you won't support both your daughters equally," she said, her voice sharp as ice, "then we'll pay for Sarah's college ourselves." I watched as my maternal grandparents stood up together, a united front. "Sarah will have her chance at college," Grandma Eleanor announced. "We'll make sure of that." Then they walked out, leaving a stunned silence behind. Later that night, I was heading to the kitchen for water when I heard my parents talking in their bedroom. The heating vent carried their words clearly up to the hallway. "Mother's being ridiculous," Mom was saying. "Sarah's not college material. She can barely keep up in regular classes. They should give us that money for Jessica's education instead. It would be wasted on Sarah. She's just not bright enough." "I don't know why they're pushing this," Dad agreed. I stood there in the dark hallway, their words washing over me like a familiar bit of rain. But somehow, it didn't hurt as much as it should have. Maybe because I'd heard it all before, or maybe because I could still hear Grandma Eleanor's fierce promise echoing in my head. The years passed, and Jessica went off to an expensive private college while I finished high school. My parents never missed a chance to brag about their perfect daughter, constantly updating everyone about Jessica's amazing college experience, her excellent grades, and her bright future ahead. I focused on my own studies, spending most of my time at Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George's house. Their quiet support meant more than all my parents' loud praise of Jessica ever could. Then came the day that shattered my parents' perfect vision of their golden child. I was in my senior year when Jessica came home from college, fresh from graduation. I was doing homework at the kitchen table when she burst through the front door, mascara running down her face. "Mom, Dad," she sobbed. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was deafening. Mom dropped her coffee mug, dark liquid spreading across the kitchen floor. "Who's the father?" Dad finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Jessica's next words sent Mom collapsing into a chair. "I don't know for sure." I watched my parents' faces as their perfect world crumbled, but it took them less than 5 minutes to reconstruct it. "Oh, sweetie," Mom rushed to hug Jessica. "It's not your fault. These things happen." "We'll help you raise the baby," Dad added quickly. "You can stay here with us." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious?" I said from my spot at the table. "She parties her way through college, gets pregnant, doesn't even know who the father is, and you're still making excuses for her." "Sarah," Mom snapped. "No, listen," I continued, years of frustration finally boiling over. "This is what happens when you spoil someone their entire life, when you never make them face consequences." "How dare you?" Dad thundered. "Your sister is going through a difficult time, and you're being cruel." Jessica burst into fresh tears, and Mom wrapped her arms around her protectively. "Get out," she screamed at me. "You heartless little." I didn't wait to hear the rest. I ran upstairs, threw some clothes into a bag, and walked out. Behind me, I could hear them consoling Jessica, telling her everything would be okay, that none of this was her fault. Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George took me in without question. I finished my senior year living with them, focusing on my college applications. My parents didn't call, didn't check on me, didn't even show up at my graduation. But I had my real family there, my grandparents, beaming with pride. As I accepted my diploma that fall, I left for college in another city, my tuition paid by my grandparents, just as they'd promised years ago. I heard through the grapevine that Jessica had given birth to a daughter and was living with our parents. They were probably still making excuses for her, still treating her like their perfect child who could do no wrong. Life had a funny way of working out. While Jessica's brilliant future had crumbled, I was thriving. After graduating college with honors, I landed a job at a top consulting firm in the city. Within 6 years, I had worked my way up to senior consultant, earned respect from my colleagues, and even managed to buy my own apartment. My routine was comfortable. Challenging work during the week, weekend brunches with friends, and regular video calls with Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George. They were proud of everything I'd accomplished, and that was all the family validation I needed. Then, on a regular Tuesday morning, my phone rang. I almost dropped my coffee when I saw Mom flash across the screen, a number I hadn't seen in almost a decade. Sarah, her voice sounded older, tired. We need your help. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my office, still trying to process what she'd told me. Jessica had run away again, this time with some guy she'd met at a bar. She'd left behind her 9-year-old daughter, the niece I'd never met. Please come home, Mom had pleaded. We need to discuss this in person. That's how I found myself driving back to my childhood home that evening. The house looked smaller than I remembered, the paint peeling around the windows. Mom and Dad had aged more than I expected. Dad's hair completely gray now, Mom's face lined with worry. They led me to the living room, the same room where they'd once declared I wasn't worth sending to college. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jessica's been unstable. Dad began, staring at his hands. She never kept a job for more than a few months. Different men, different apartments. She always ended up back here. Mom wiped her eyes. We tried to help, paid her debts, watched Lucy while she worked, or said she was working. But last week she met this man, said he was taking her to California to become an actress. She laughed bitterly. She packed a bag and left. Didn't even say goodbye to Lucy. We're drowning in debt, Dad admitted, his voice cracking. Credit cards, personal loans, all to keep Jessica afloat. And now I waited for the rest, watching them squirm uncomfortably on the couch that had faded from cream to dingy beige. We want you to take Lucy, Mom finally said. Adopt her, actually. You're stable, successful. You could give her a good life. We're too old for this. We can't start over with a child. I sat there, stunned. These people, who had written me off as worthless, who hadn't even come to my graduation, were now asking me to take responsibility for a child I'd never met. A child they'd helped raise for 9 years while enabling Jessica's chaos. After my parents went to bed that night, I sat in the kitchen with Lucy. She was nothing like I expected, nothing like Jessica. While my sister had been loud and demanding, Lucy was quiet and thoughtful, with serious brown eyes and a gentle smile. Do you like to read? I asked, noticing a worn copy of Harry Potter on the kitchen counter. I love it, she said softly, but Grandma says I read too much. She says I should do something useful instead. Over cups of hot chocolate, Lucy slowly opened up. She told me about her life with my parents, how Grandma sighed heavily whenever she had to make Lucy dinner, how Grandpa complained about the cost of her school supplies. They didn't hit her or starve her, but their resentment was palpable in every interaction. I spent the next week taking time off work, getting to know my niece. We went for ice cream, visited the local library, and talked about everything and nothing. Lucy was smart, kind, and remarkably resilient despite everything she'd been through. She showed me her Strata report cards that no one had ever celebrated, her artwork that never made it to the fridge. The decision to adopt her wasn't easy. I had a career, a life I'd built carefully from scratch. But watching Lucy try to make herself smaller, quieter, less troublesome, just as I had at her age, made the choice clear. The legal process was exhausting. For months, I gathered documentation, my financial records, character references, proof of stable employment. Jessica didn't contest the termination of her parental rights, didn't even show up for the hearing. Finally, after what felt like endless paperwork and interviews, I became Lucy's legal guardian. The day we packed up her room at my parents' house, they barely looked up from their TV show. "Don't forget to forward her school records," was all Mom said. Lucy flourished in our new life together. She decorated her room in our apartment with fairy lights and bookshelves, joined the school's debate team, made friends who came over for movie nights and study sessions. We developed our own little rituals: Sunday morning pancakes, evening walks in the park, marathon sessions of board games. Monthly visits to Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa George became a highlight for both of us. They doted on Lucy the way loving grandparents should, proudly displaying her artwork and report cards, remembering her favorite foods, listening to her stories with genuine interest. 5 years passed in what felt like the blink of an eye. Lucy turned 14, growing into a confident, compassionate teenager who consistently made the honor roll. My parents never called to check on her, never sent birthday cards, never asked how she was doing. But Lucy didn't seem to mind. She had found her real family. The phone call from my parents came on a Saturday morning. "We'd like you and Lucy to come visit," Mom said, her voice suspiciously cheerful. "We miss her." After 5 years of silence, their sudden interest set off alarm bells. But I decided to go. Lucy deserved to make her own choices about family relationships, and I didn't want to be the one standing in her way. The moment we walked through their front door, I understood why they'd called. Jessica was there, sitting on the couch like she'd never left. "Lucy," she cried, jumping up and rushing toward my niece. "Oh, baby, I've missed you so much." I watched Lucy's face carefully. She stood frozen, emotions flickering across her features: hope, fear, confusion, longing. Jessica wrapped her in a tearful embrace, while our parents looked on approvingly. "I've changed," Jessica announced, wiping her eyes. "I've realized what's important. I want my daughter back." The word "back" hit me like a slap, like Lucy was a borrowed sweater she'd finally decided to reclaim. "I'm living in Phoenix now," Jessica continued, "with Robert. He's got a great job, and we have a beautiful house. Lucy would love it there." "Do you have a job?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Jessica's smile faltered. "Well, not right now, but Robert makes enough for all of us." "And what happens if things don't work out with Robert?" I pressed. "What's your backup plan?" "Why are you being so negative?" Mom snapped. "Your sister is trying to do the right thing." "The right thing?" I laughed incredulously. The right thing would have been not abandoning her daughter for 5 years. The right thing would have been sending birthday cards, making phone calls, showing any interest at all in Lucy's life. "I made mistakes," Jessica wailed, "but she's my daughter." "Stop being selfish, Sarah," Dad cut in. "You've done your part, but Lucy needs her real mother now. You can have your own children if you want to play mommy so badly." I stared at them, stunned by their cruelty. These people who had failed not one but 2 daughters. They had enabled Jessica's irresponsibility for decades and had never once, in 5 years, asked how Lucy was doing in school or what her interests were. Now they thought they could just restart the cycle of dysfunction. "Lucy isn't a toy you can pass around," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "She's a person who needs stability and real love, not empty promises." Where were you when she had nightmares, when she was sick, when she won the school spelling bee? Where were any of you? "You have no right," Jessica screamed. "She's my child." "A child you abandoned," I shot back. "A child you left with people who resented her existence. A child who deserved better than all of you." Lucy, who had been silent throughout this exchange, suddenly grabbed my hand. "We're leaving," I announced, squeezing her hand reassuringly. "And don't you dare try to contact us." Jessica's call came exactly a week after our confrontation. When I saw her number, I almost didn't answer, but something told me to record the conversation, a habit I developed after years of dealing with difficult clients. "Hey, sis," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I've been thinking about our situation, and I think I have a solution that could work for everyone." "What situation?" "Lucy, of course. Look, I know you've gotten attached to her, and I know you make good money at your fancy job. So here's the deal. Give me $150,000, and I won't sue for custody." The phone nearly slipped from my hand. "Excuse me." "It's really a win-win," Jessica continued casually, as if she weren't trying to sell her own child. "You get to keep Lucy, and I get enough money to start fresh. You can afford it with your salary." "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice shaking. "You're trying to sell your daughter to me? Don't be so dramatic. I'm just being practical. You want Lucy. I need money. Simple business transaction. She's your child, Jessica, not a used car." "Fine," she snapped, her sweet tone vanishing. "Have it your way. I'll sue for custody, and you'll never see her again." "How's that for practical?" She hung up and I sat there, clutching my phone, feeling sick to my stomach. The lawsuit came 3 days later. Jessica's new boyfriend had hired her a slick lawyer who specialized in family court. The initial filing painted Jessica as a reformed mother who had overcome hardship to create a stable home for her daughter, while portraying me as a manipulative aunt who had taken advantage of a temporary situation. In court, Jessica played her role perfectly. Tears streaming down her face, she told the judge about her journey of personal growth and how she'd found stability with her new partner. She claimed I had alienated Lucy from her, that I was using her daughter to prove I was better than my sister. On her behalf, our parents testified that they had only requested me to babysit Lucy for a short time while Jessica recovered. Dad even implied that I was trying to turn Lucy against her mother by influencing her emotionally. I was ready when I sat there and listened to their falsehoods while they spun their web of deceit. "Your Honor," my attorney said, "I'd like to submit an audio recording into evidence." As Jessica's words filled the courtroom, her face became pale. "I won't file a custody lawsuit if you give me $150,000. I need money. You want Lucy." Straightforward commercial deal. The ensuing hush was deafening. Jessica's attorney stumbled and attempted to protest, but the harm was already done. For the first time, our parents remained still in their chairs, making no excuses to accommodate their ideal daughter. Then Lucy got to her feet. She appeared older and more self-assured than I had ever seen her at 14. Her words, "I want to stay with Sarah," were rather explicit. My mom left me behind. I was picked by Sarah. My actual family is her. I saw Jessica's face fall apart, not because of true sorrow, but rather because she realized she had no more power. Our parents were unable to look at each other, and Lucy, rose to her feet, at last unburdened by her mother's shadow. The judge made a prompt and clear ruling. I was granted complete custody of Lucy, and Jessica was prohibited from communicating with her daughter at all. Her effort to sell custody was deemed morally reprehensible by the court, who also said it was an obvious sign that she was unable to be a parent. As the decision was read, I saw Jessica sob in her chair. Without saying a word, her boyfriend, who had been seated in the rear of the courtroom, got up and left. I then learned that he had left her that same day because he was repulsed by her effort to sell her own child. In the courtroom parking lot, my parents attempted to apprehend us. "Sarah, please," demanded Mom. We can work this out as a family. I gave them one final glance. Relatives, neither of us has considered you family in years. What you did to me and what you let Jessica to do to Lucy is not fair. Dad insisted, but where will Jessica go? Robert abandoned her. There was no comedy in my laughter. Obviously, I'm still concerned about Jessica. There are certain things that never change. Jessica returned to her original residence with our parents. The golden child is still being pampered, forgiven, and not maturing. This time, however, she had lost something priceless as a result of her mistakes. Life continued. As though the burden of doubt had finally been removed, Lucy flung herself back into her studies with newfound vigor. She began taking photography classes, joined the school newspaper team, and expressed interest in pursuing a college degree in journalism. As we were preparing supper one evening, she asked, "You know what's funny?" Because my mother kept departing, I believed for years that I was flawed. However, I now see that she was the issue. She was only capable of loving herself. In awe of her knowledge, I gave her a firm hug. "You're the strongest person I know, kiddo." Grandpa George and Grandma Eleanor continued to be our pillars of support. At their home, Sundays became a revered custom. They preserved newspaper clippings of every item Lucy wrote for the school paper, boasted to their friends about her accomplishments, and proudly hung her photographs in their living room. Grandma Eleanor once told me, "You two saved each other," as we watched Lucy teach Grandpa George how to operate his new digital camera. "Just like George and I tried to save you." She was correct. I had discovered the family I had always desired, not the one I was born into, but the one we chose together, while attempting to give Lucy the upbringing I was never able to have. I still sometimes receive texts from my parents about Jessica's most recent drama, but I choose to ignore them. Lucy said she prefers it that way and hasn't spoken to her mother since the court battle. After burning, certain bridges ought to remain ashes. Lucy took first place in a student journalism competition held around the state last week. I reflected on the fearful 9-year-old child I had met years before and the self-assured adolescent she had grown into as I watched her get her prize. I reflected on broken cycles, healed wounds, and unrestricted love.